PSC chronic wasting. Would you people reply to that, or do you want to leave it alone because in adequate testing regarding glyphosate, etc.?
Well, I'll put my 2 cents in. We know of a scientist that was on the path of documentation from the use of glyphosate and how that organism was transferring from the soil to the plant to the mammal, and it was deer. And he works for the U.S. He's no longer an active field researcher. He's in a closet somewhere in the southern part of the U.S.
I'll be happy to. Because if you looked at that chart that I had with this chelation stability constants for glyphosate, and then if you look at Purdy's research on chronic wasting disease, you see anywhere you go in the world, you see 2 things that are associated with chronic wasting disease. One is you find that the relationship between copper and manganese in the brain are disrupted. Copper is the essential transition element for brain function. Manganese is in the brain for other functions. But it's pretty showed when you look at the prion diseases, especially Creutzfeldt-Jakob, with chronic wasting disease, you'll see that the copper has been replaced in large part by manganese. Copper is a 2-valent compound. Manganese has the potential for 6. We did a lot of work with trying to identify a new protein in GMO crops or with heavy use of glyphosate. But what Purdy shows is that when you get into a copper deficiency, and that can either be in environmental conditions or in an induced deficiency like glyphosate, manganese will move in and replace and try to keep that function there. Replace the copper, and because of the 6-valent states, you get a folding of the protein. And Creutzfeldt-Jakob or wasting disease. You'll see that disruption and consistent all the way through. You also see that disruption with the GMO as well as with the glyphosate in corn, and soybeans, ash trees, elm trees. Chris Johnson, veterinarian, was at Iowa State, or no, in Wisconsin. Excuse me, he was a wildlife veterinarian before they moved him. Showed that it's picked up by the grass and then can be transmitted to animals that would graze on that grass. You see that especially where you're modifying that environment that changes that relationship between your copper and your manganese. Now there's several other herbicides that can do that. None of them even come close to approaching the effect of glyphosate, just the availability of it. So from a causation standpoint, I don't think there's any question that it's a contributing factor, if not a major factor. And when you look at the tracing of wasting disease, chronic wasting disease in deer and elk in Wisconsin, you can track that with the adoption of Roundup Ready soybeans. That's just a correlation, but all the correlations seem to point in the same direction. But every time someone starts to do a study on it, from a government standpoint at least, they had a job transfer and start pushing a pencil rather than testing.
How far away are you making it hard to be
I came home one day and was really upset because, through the intelligence community, I've been notified that there was, number out for me. I've been shot at and stabbed and beat to a pulp and a few other things and various assignments that I've had. I was mad. He said the guy only went to Monsanto and asked for $25,000 to shut me up. I thought I was worth a whole lot more than that.
I will comment, by the grace of God, the attempt on his life, which was beyond suspicion upon suspicion, beyond suspicion, that the good Lord saw fit to keep him here.
And if I can make one comment about chronic wasting disease, and I think maybe Frank was almost preceded the question to him. But if any of you happen to have a chronic wasting disease deer in hunting season, and I happen to have a permit for such, let me know. Now, remember that picture that you see that Howard showed, and also Dr. Huber showed of that cow with chronic clostridial thing or botulism? And if any of you have seen a chronic wasting deer or BSE cow or BSE elk, it's going to cross your mind. And of course, Dr. Huber and Howard have just told you all the mechanics of it, but nobody would be able to convince me that they aren't related. And Dr. Huber, I think, probably forgets the time that he sent me a picture of where all the watersheds are and where we see the chronic wasting disease. People will say, we don't see chronic wasting disease in this state or that state. But and I was discussing this with Dr. Huber, and he sent me the watershed pictures that were pretty dramatic about that. My comments.
Other questions?
I have, is the antibiotic ingredient in glyphosate the main issue for everything we've talked about?
The question is the antibiotic issue or aspect component of glyphosate the leading cause of everything we talked about? And I'm gonna give you my 2 cents and then step out of the way. That compound is multifaceted bad all the way around. The synthetic amino acid product, there's science hopefully gonna be published this year about it, that not only does it displace glycine, but it's having an effect with the full amino acid composition, 27. The chelating effects and the antimicrobial are it's a double whammy, because you're tying up the nutrition that you need to sustain the immune system, but at the same time you're attacking the biological community. And Dr. Huber didn't share it in his presentation today for the sake of time, but in the soils, they've showed that not only does it chelate manganese, for example, the microorganisms that make manganese available, the reducers, they're at 90%, and the oxidizer is at 10%. You put on the glyphosate and it flips around, you got 10% reducers and 90% oxidizers. So you tied it up and also made it harder to make available because your microbial population has suffered. So it's multifaceted. It is a key component, but don't ever let it be said that it's just that.
The thing that I had in my mind, if you have a cow that gets an infection and you give her antibiotics, there's a withdrawal date from that date till the time of slaughter. It's right on the bottle, right? Am I not right?
Yep.
Okay. So if you have a cow that got fed glyphosate grain and she had an infection, and this got rid of the infection, and you took her off that cereal, 100% guaranteed there was no glyphosate left in that, would that be the same? There would be a withdrawal period, and that would be cleared up and go to her system?
Did everybody hear his question? What would the withdrawal period be from taking the glyphosate contaminated feed away from the animal? I hope it doesn't get to that point, because the thing on the liability that Dr. Huber talked about, that you need to read that full sheet that was passed around, folks.
I didn't get one.
Well, if you didn't get one, there's likely more here. That is scary as hell. You want to talk about losing the farm and the potential to ever sustain yourself financially ever again. That's that sheet.
Because if I've raised cattle for years and years and years, if you have a calf that has a bacterial, something, you give it a vaccine to clear it up, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I should have, and I was editing my presentation as Dr. Huber was doing his, so that we wouldn't have overlap. The mind can only absorb as much as the butt can tolerate. And I took out the patent that Monsanto filed on glyphosate in 2003 and was updated in 2010. It's patent number 7771736. You go to the US Patent Office website, do a patent number search, put that number in, you can read it. And you can see how it wipes out the beneficials. They don't talk about how it increases the opportunistic. But that's the point that Dr. Huber helped me understand so well. Wherever it's used, it's going to drive increased intensity and virulence of the bad stuff. Whether it's a fungal disease in crop production, whether it's, and it's coming all the way up the food chain. Don't think it isn't. You know, the severity of the leaky gut, or the imbalance of the C. diff, and the only way to fix it is to have a fecal transplant. Well, guess what? That wasn't an antibiotic. A fecal transplant, they take a whole bunch of good bugs and they put them in where the bad bugs is, and the good beat the bad.
because antibiotics for the most part kill the good and the bacteria in the gut.
They're not selective. That should answer that.
It answers like 2 cents, and then
Okay, sure. No, and my answer to that one is that, yeah, the antibiotic part of it is paramount, but also Dr. Huber has talked about it, and so did Howard talk about the effect on the immune system. And you've seen a couple of things there, especially the picture of the plant where the plant was immune. And so you can have immunity to some particular disease or group of animals that have immunity, and you don't know the disease is there. All of a sudden we throw some glyphosate in there, or glyphosate feed, and we see a breakdown with the pneumonia. And so the antibiotic part of glyphosate, I feel, is really important, but also the effect on the enzymes, the mineral uptake, and this immune function is paramount.
just wanted to point out that a lot of the action of antibiotics is as mineral chelators. So you really have both systems involved. If you're on a long-term tetracycline antibiotic therapy or something, the doctor should have you on a zinc supplement, maybe an iron supplement, because they're strong chelators. I think in the medical profession, we're really starting to highlight a lot of those nutrient relationships that we have with our drugs. And there are positive and there are negatives. Some of the good ones really work by increasing the nutrition then that's needed, and the nutrients that are needed for that physiological function in other areas. And you can have chelators that will be fairly specific for some tissues or for some crops. So we'll still be able to get the nutrient even though it may be chelated. And that's why you see selectivity in the herbicides. others where it would be another mechanism, even though it may have the same cofactors. So you really have both of them working there and involved, both the chelation aspect, either from a function of the antibiotic or as an independent function with the chelator on your other physiology.
Okay, other questions?
I got one for you, Brad. What do we do with it?
That's what I was gonna ask these guys.
I mean, 86 million acres is GMO. You got 86 million acres of GMO corn, so that means there's 5 million acres of corn to feed. 42 million head of corn we need to feed livestock, so we have this problem, so what do you do about it?
The trend for genetically engineered seed use in the United States is going